who are coming here, real guests. So whenever I welcome people, I like to acknowledge where we're welcoming people to. I'm on campus today in Kensington, so that's the Bedegal lands, the lands of the Bedegal people, and I acknowledge their elders past and present, and have a particular welcome to any Indigenous people here today, acknowledging their custodian of the land for so many years. Today we've got Nalini. Now we will be recording today, so look, if you have any concerns with that, just keep your camera off and don't say anything. It's probably best, or you can send me an email if you're concerned about the recording for any reason. We like to record them because so many people do access them at different times, people in different time zones or people with a different schedule. Now, Nalini Pather is one of our leading teachers at the university, and she has played such an enormously important role in the Scientia Education Academy. She helps guide teaching by example, and her own discipline is anatomy, where she leads the teaching of anatomy. Anatomy is just absolutely fundamental for the teaching of medicine and biology, and Nalini creates a wonderful community of students and terrific engagement with the students, the staff, the demonstrators, and the group, and they're coming back to campus now every now and then for practicals. I was so pleased, Nalini, when I saw the topic of your talk, because this year people say that, you know, the world, we've all been in the same storm, but some people use this analogy, we've been in different boats in the same storm, because each of us have had a different path through COVID, and each of us have learned different things. And most of us have kept afloat, particularly in Australia, and we've seen and learned different things. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your discussion, Nalini, of what we've learned, and seeing everyone's comments in the chat and things, so that we can fashion next year as the best year ever for teaching at UNSW. That's over from me. I'll turn off my mic now.
Thank you very much, Merlin, for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen first, and hopefully everything goes according to plan. And you see that really well. Let me know if you can see that, or if there's any issues. That'll be great.
Yeah, all good.
All good, fantastic. So like Merlin said, I'm going to talk about the entire experience of accelerated remote delivery. And I really want to talk about the things that I've gathered in terms of what's happened and trying to make sense of it, but also trying to think about what do I do in the future. And want to acknowledge that this isn't just my learnings, but learnings from a whole group of people that I've gathered together. So that I'm putting that out there. So I think this year has been like no other, like Merlin just said. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, said that we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. And I think we all can really say that is definitely true. We are in a historic time. We have seen change that we had not conceived before. And technology has shifted how we teach. It's an amazing time for education innovation, and I think it is an exciting time. But before I go further, I do want to acknowledge that these are also challenging times. Without fail, unanimously in all countries, student well-being is of great concern. And I fully acknowledge that there are others that are suffering much, much worse than us. But for us, our real world problem is the economic disruption brought by COVID. And we are painfully aware of higher education rolling out a new business model across Australia. There is no denying that. It is troubling. But today, I want us to look a little bit further. And so for the next 30 minutes, I would like you to imagine that your troubles can be set aside. And for the next 30 minutes, I want to reflect on learning and teaching, and reflecting on it in terms of the periods that we've been through. So the first period is the period of disruption. I want to reflect what happened and what we've learned from that, the transition, And then I want to draw together some of the multiple dimensions of my own experience, but also learnings from other people to imagine what we can do in the future. And like Merlin said, I don't think anyone has the answers of what that future is, and we've all got different perspectives, but getting those perspectives together is really important. I think it's a good time for us at this time, whether it's alone in our own private moments or together in a community like we are in now, to reflect on what has happened, and bearing in mind two things that have been happening as well, and that is that we're in a radical period of transformation. We have opportunity right now to evolve the education system and make it better. And we also have a few viable models of what we could do thanks to COVID. Because of that massive transition in technology, we actually have tried a few things, and we have some things that we can learn from that. As we reflect for the next 30 minutes or so, at the back of our mind, I want us to be thinking about what has changed. What does it mean for our teaching? What does it mean for our students who are learning? But also, at the back of our mind, I want to think about pedagogy. I was reminded a few months ago that pedagogy includes also technical aspects of teaching. So when we're talking about remote, online, and distant aspects of teaching, it includes things like the tools, but it also includes the workflows that we have to make teaching smooth, but also a good experience for our students. So more significantly, it also includes the knowledge that underpins and informs the principles which we design and facilitate learning with. So with that kind of thinking in the back of our minds, I want us to be thinking and reflecting about our future. Now, a few bodies of literature have emerged in the last 10 years, and probably more so in the last 5, that has been discussing different modes of delivery. So there is modes like blended, which we're very familiar with, and probably something that I want to talk about a little bit more today is this hybrid model of learning. So Anderson has done lots of work in the area of supporting students online, and his main point is, irrespective of what mode of learning we encounter or that we adopt, it's support for students that underpins that experience. And that support of students includes things like monitoring how they're learning. Is that learning effective? And at the same time, I think newer research is actually showing that we actually don't have good enough pedagogical frameworks for this thing that we call hybrid learning. And I'll tell you what hybrid learning is in a minute if you haven't encountered it before. So we don't actually know how to do this well enough yet. But I said we would reflect, and I want you to also reflect at this time. So I recall the disruption. I recall March, and I want you to think back about what happened in March. So right at the beginning, there was many early signs that disruption was imminent. Even before term started, we had various meetings trying to work out whether we were going to have any disruption. I know for my own team, I started to get us to think about how might we deliver teaching if we had to go remotely, and especially for our largest classes, because that's where the biggest challenge is. But this is no easy task for a discipline like anatomy. And so when the middle of March, the decision was made for us to go remote, it was almost a surreal experience. And I think it probably is the same for you. We marched into action without thinking too much, and literally overnight, we actively repurposed and redeployed resources, upskilling digital competencies and developing material to transition from face-to-face to remote delivery. It was a pretty radical time. I don't think we actually realized how radical it was when we were going through that time. I recall the day that the university decided we won't have students on campus the next day, and it was a day in which I had a fairly large lab. So I was amazed that I didn't get hysterical, that I calmly just did the job that I was supposed to do. So I'm sure you can recall that time. I would love us to be able to chat about that at some stage. But the other aspect about recalling that time is just embracing the fact that we actually did an amazing thing in that time. So at that time, because there were lots of things happening, and for a discipline like anatomy, like Merlin just mentioned, it is a very practical, tactile subject. Trying to think about how we will deliver this remotely was a big challenge. But also, in parallel with that, I was very keen that we should be doing something that is in step with what other institutions in Australia was doing. So we weren't doing something that was radically out there, but also that we weren't missing certain things that we needed to do. And so for that, I was really fortunate that I had a really vibrant medical education community on social media, and I tapped into that community like everyone else was doing. It was comforting to know that it was a shared experience across New Zealand, that we were all pretty much having a similar experience with the disruption. But at the same time, I actually wanted to know a little bit more about what was happening at other institutions. I wanted to know what their practical challenges were and how they were overcoming it. I also wanted a little bit of reassurance that the things that I was having a big challenge with was also things that they were having a challenge with as well. So at that time, I started a little bit of a group to think through different issues together. We consolidated our experiences, we reflected on it, we used some qualitative methodology, and we actually published what we had considered was our experiences, our challenges, and from there, some recommendations about what we would need to do as a discipline to keep focus on making sure our students were learning. So some of those things are up here on the PowerPoint, and I'm not going to go through with that, through each of those, because I want to move on to a little bit more important things at this time for us. I think the one thing that surprised me from this work that we did was that many of our friends, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, who hadn't encountered that disruption yet, was really keen to learn from us. And so lots of these recommendations were things that they actually put into place. And it was really good to see that happen. But besides that, from the entire disruption period, I learned quite a lot. I learned about myself, I learned about my students, but more than that, I also learned about the people I work with. And I do want to take this time to remind us of that moment. And I do want to celebrate the amazing things that happened at that time. I think in spite of parallel personal disruptions in life, our combined teams did some amazing work. And the fact that we were able to pivot online and continue teaching was phenomenal. This is only a part of my anatomy team. Unfortunately, I don't think we have a picture with everyone in it, but it does show you the different parts of who we are. There's technical and support team, there's academics, all in the red shirts here for some reason. And then there are, of course, our students will partner with us. And I'm really proud of all the things each of them has managed to do. I do want to say that our students were spectacular during the disruption. They were very forgiving, they were patient with us, but most of all, they were so grateful and encouraging for the things that we had done. But actually, moving on from that, there's also other things that I learned through that experience. And some of those things was really that our students live in very disparate environments. So while we were designing things with the presumption that every student was going to have internet access, I had students call me to say, I keep dropping off from the lectures because I don't live in a city. I live in a remote place and we don't have internet access all the time. The internet is unstable. And then other kinds of issues like I'm trying to access the recording, but I can't access the recording because it takes so long for it to go up for me to access it. So all kinds of things that I didn't quite appreciate as much before came to the fore for me. But also other disparate issues, like, for example, students who may have had internet and all of those things, but they were struggling with trying to help their parents who don't communicate well in English manage the change of environment and the different circumstances. And there were genuine reasons why they had to be away from studying. So I learned a lot about my students. I think I also learned that the students were triangulating experiences. So while I was triangulating with my colleagues across Australia, they were also triangulating with students across Australia. And when they found that we were doing things slightly differently, it did make them a little bit anxious. So that was interesting, but that also was a real wake-up moment for me to make sure that we were proactive in communicating to students what we were doing and why we were doing it the way we were doing. The other important thing that I found was that we have such a fantastic UNSW community. I was so glad for all those teams that went up almost overnight on UNSW Teams, and the many places you could pop a question and crowdsource information and solutions. And that was amazing, actually, to think of how we all came together. I think I also became very conscious of upskilling and the skills that I needed to sharpen up on and the skills that other people in my team needed to be doing. But more than that, I think we've been talking about well-being for such a long time that we kind of put it into this mystery box. But dealing with the issues of students and of staff and of the whole transition, I think it made me realize just how complex well-being is, and that although we try to deal with it in so many different ways, we actually don't understand it enough to be able to be really effective. And so that is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot. So I went to some of the literature, and I do draw from that lots of things. For example, Ching in 2018 speaks a lot about delivering online or remote material to students. And he expresses that part of the problem is that the instructional situation, the environment, is so complex. There is so many things happening. And if you haven't planned or organized enough, it's almost too tricky to navigate smoothly. So you're always going to encounter problems. And more, we just need to be troubleshooting for those problems well before they happen. I think for me, one of the challenges was when we were transitioning online and remote, there was lots of information coming to us, so much. There were so many webinars about learn to do this and learn to do the other. And they all seemed to be tips and tricks for how to do things, but they actually didn't contextualize what we were doing in terms of the knowledge that we needed to judge whether something was effective or the best thing to use in the situation that we were in. So it comes back to my earlier point about we need to do more work on pedagogy. So that term pedagogy is probably as elusive as any other term that is around education. And I just want to explain what I'm meaning by that term pedagogy here. I think pedagogy refers more than just deploying learning techniques or methods. It is about the interaction between learning and teaching practices, and also the underlying beliefs and values about how learning is happening, what should be happening, and then trying to deal with the assumptions that we've made to enable learning. So using the term in this way, I think draws attention to the fact that learning is about a relationship, and it's a relationship based on values and assumptions and connecting people with each other and with the facilitator. So that's a bit of my rambling of that first, I think it's a month and a half of transition. It very neatly timetables in terms of T1 for us here in UNSW. But I think the next phase that we moved on to was this phase of transition. And so for me, T2 and T3 was very much about transition. And we tried things, some things worked, some things didn't. But compared to where we were in March and April, I think we had a much better idea of what we were doing, and we could see the road a little bit more clearly. Couldn't quite see what was around the corner, but we could see the road. I'd like to suggest that we are actually in an in-between phase. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm in an in-between phase. I don't quite know what next year is or the year after, but I feel like we're trying things and we're waiting. The challenge, though, as we continue delivering things remotely or in this hybrid form, is that if we still use old content in a new mode or in a new platform, it's still old content. Our learners have shifted, but our technology has shifted, expectations have shifted, but we're using old ways of teaching or old pedagogies. So we need to be transformed to enable this powerful learning. So a key aspect of everything that is changing is digital technologies. And one way in which to consider digital technology integration is this model that I came across last year. It's called the SAM model. I'm not sure, did any of you hear of this before? I tell my students that when everyone is silent, it means that everything's fine. Yeah, okay, great. So Nikki has heard of the SAM model, fantastic. It was developed by this guy, Ruben Puentendura, and it characterizes 4 different degrees of technology integration. So the letters SAMR stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So for a long time, most of higher education was here at the S step. And the biggest challenge for us at the S step was getting people to take that first step in and start using technology. I think through blended learning and the Inspired Learning project at UNSW, many of us actually got to that first step. But the next step is actually the much bigger step. It's the step that is around augmentation. So it's looking at functional improvement. And then, of course, is modification, which is about redesigning what we do. So for me, as I look at where we are and the road ahead, I think this kind of makes a little bit more sense to me about what is it that we are about for the next few years as we try to improve our students' experiences. So if we place ourselves as a learner in this last year and think about the scale of substitution that we've had during the COVID pivot, you would see how we took a big step into the S. So we've taken lots of the things that we did face-to-face and we've tried to substitute something for it online. And that has been great. It's been fantastic. But our next big step is augmentation. And augmentation requires us to understand the pedagogy, or even if we don't understand it, it requires us to come together to form a common framework in which we can approach this together. So it is slightly different where we're going now, and we have to work on the pedagogy. So with that, I'd like to also add this term that I've been reading a lot about, and it seems to be a lot in the education literature right now, and it is this thing around hybrid learning. So this is an approach that combines face-to-face and online learning, which incorporates successful practices of flipped classroom, blended learning, remote learning, distant learning, and the fantastic things we do in face-to-face learning. And it's supposed to be this profound personal experience that is relevant and engaging and brings the best of all together. I think, of course, this is the dream that we want, but it's going to be a little bit of a journey to get to that dream. There's been many challenges as an educator. And I think for me, one of the biggest challenges as we've tried to go through this process is the challenge of, actually, that's the wrong slide, ignore that, is the challenge of working out what my role is. So I don't know about you, but for the last 6 months, I haven't been quite sure of what my role as an educator is. Has anyone else had that same experience? So I didn't quite understand, what do students require of me? Do they want me to motivate them? Am I there to teach them and to guide them? Am I there to praise them? Am I there to be the peacemaker and work out how they get together and work in this space? And of course, like Amanda just put in there, of course, we're also the counselor. So our role is changing. And I think fundamentally in that changing role, it's working out for each of us. It'll be slightly different and we have different strengths, but it'll be trying to work out what that role is for us. And this brings me to another thing that I've been thinking about, and that is that teaching is about relationships. So talking to our students from T2 and in T3, I think the thing that they miss the most is that they miss the relationships with each other, the relationships with us. When I spoke to some students a few weeks ago, they were really, really excited. And they were really, really excited because they were coming to campus for their first prac since COVID began. And when I was talking to them, I asked, oh, I was so glad that they were so excited about the prac. And I thought, oh, they really love anatomy. But actually, as I was talking to them, I realized they love to get together with each other. And this was their opportunity to actually get together with each other. So they're actually missing that social interaction with each other. Now, this whole idea of teaching through relationships or this relationship pedagogy is really complex. It's about developing relationships. It's about embedding a social environment. And it's about sharing experiences, sharing your experience, but also participating in students' shared experiences. I must tell you, I'm not so comfortable with this. I think for a long time, I've had this mindset that there's students and there's us and there's a divide. Not that that's a relationship divide, but more like a professional divide. And so for me, trying to cross this barrier about what this relationship pedagogy is part of navigating that. And the more I read around this, the more I realize that this whole relationship pedagogy isn't about not having the professional relationship. It is really about getting to know your students better and letting them actually see you. It is about recognizing that we are all humans and we are all exploring and learning together. So I'm really, really interested in this. And I've been experimenting a little bit in this area. And I've not been experimenting alone. I've been experimenting with my colleagues. And I think often they actually don't know what I'm about. Or I have ideas and they think it may be like too far out there, but they've been really good in just playing along. So that's really, really fantastic. And two of them are actually here on the call. Terry and Annalise have convened the last med course with me, and many of these things we've actually worked together. So I thought I'll talk about a few things that I've tried. I don't really know the tangible impact of this because we're still waiting for my experience, but I have lots and lots of messages from students, and that makes me think that the impact is positive. So one of the things I've tried over the last course is to send students a weekly email. Now, I don't know what your email box is like, but mine is crazy. I don't want anyone to actually look at how many emails I haven't opened over the year. So when I spoke to a few students, they said one of the things that they struggled with since we've been gone through COVID is the number of emails they received. One student told me she had 91 emails in one day from the university, from different academic staff, from EMID and all kinds of things that have changed in terms of timetabling that send them emails every time something changes. And I thought, well, I would be overwhelmed as well. And I totally understand why they haven't been opening emails if they get 91 in a day. So what I've actually tried to do is at the end of every week, I send one email to our students. And in that email, I do a few things. One is trying to embed something about this relationship pedagogy in it. So being a motivator, trying to give them some positive encouragement to go for the next week. Reassuring them of the things that we've learned over the last week, and if there's other opportunities for them to make up that learning. Trying to put in some social activity. So we did fantastic things like have a trivia night, which I must say Annie is the master of trivia and she's on this call. So it was largely her who handled that. But also we've been trying other things in the space around relationship pedagogy. So one of the things is starting every activity with an icebreaker. So getting the students to share about their pets or where they would like to have gone on holiday but didn't get a chance to go on holiday, or their food, what they like, what they don't like, their shoes, their tie, their hats, any kind of thing that gets them into a conversation about something about in their life, but not so personal that it makes them uncomfortable. Students really, really like talking about pets. I suppose we all do, right? So they're no different from us. And then the other thing we've tried is trying to create online social spaces. So our students actually tell us that they find it really difficult, especially if they're in first year, to meet other people in their group as they've gone online. And so we've tried to build some social spaces. So how does this work? So this is one of our, actually it's a mix of 2 courses. So we've used Teams, and we've used Teams quite a lot this year, like everyone else. So in the Teams, we do have channels for students to actually have video conferences or video calls, and that's what you can see here in the first image. But we also have a little bit of a social channel, and in the social channel, we share about our lives, like which beach do you like to go to? In this particular one, they share about all kinds of things, including their pets. And this particular one here was from around the middle of the year, and it was a student actually sharing a little bit about her mental health challenges and the things she was trying to do to overcome it. And it was really great to see how all the other students actually championed her and helped her and shared things that they were doing in terms of mental wellness as well. So that was one of the things that we tried. In an earlier course, I used Teams as the main learning management system, and in that, it gives you a number of insights. So for example, here, this graph with lots of dots, that's the Insight app in Teams. And what it does is that it allows you to drill down in each of these things and see what students have been looking at. Each row is a student. It tells you what each student has been looking at, and it also gives you a list of the students who haven't engaged in anything on Teams for a while or for a week or for a day. And you can set an Autobot to send them an email to say, hey, you haven't been to Teams, there's a few things happening, you may want to just touch bases with your peers to know how things are going. So that has been really, really good as well. And then of course we do other things like Polly, which is the polar. And one of the things I've really tried that has been, I think, good, I know I still seem to be thinking about it. I haven't quite made up my mind whether it's been good or whether I'm still thinking about it. So I've used Slido, and the reason why I've used Slido is, although we have multiple places where students can ask us questions and interact with us, for example, on Moodle Forum, as well as in Teams, I think there's a certain space or freedom when you have an anonymous place to ask a question, especially when you're in first year. And so the students have really engaged well with Slido in such a positive and proactive way. I think when I first put it in, I was worried that I was going to have to moderate the conversations there, the questions, but they have been so courteous and well-mannered and encouraging, even in their anonymity. But they've also asked questions that were really good, because it gave them a place for advocacy for themselves if they weren't happy to actually do it themselves. So that was really good. And the other thing that we've been trying in Teams is there's this little thing called Reflect. So when you do certain activities, especially in the course that we've just had, where there's some very confronting conversations that you have in small groups around things like death and dying and people who are really ill. And so sending the students a little kind of form, which is like this, it's called Reflect, and it just allows the students to reflect, but also to use the smiley faces to tell us how they're feeling. And that's been really good in terms of just recognizing the students who are not coping or really struggling, and dropping a Teams chat and saying, hey, how are you going? Do you want to talk about anything? And then reminding them of the really great services we have in our faculty that are places for them to help. So that's good. The other thing that I've tried that students have really loved, I didn't quite understand this. This is like my 14-year-old son going to Woolworths and collecting those little characters that he doesn't really play with, but he just likes to collect them. So these praise thing, it's a badges. So when you have a conversation with a student or when they contact you, there's these little badges that you can give them after that discussion. I just started it like just to see what the badge was about in the first conversation, but the students were so excited. So whenever they contact me with a little conversation about, this has been difficult, can you explain this? I tend not to give them answers. I tend to ask them questions. And as they work through that, they have their shining moments. And then I give them a badge and they just love it. And sometimes they have a chat with me just to get a different badge, which is really, really fun and interesting, but it's actually exhausting. So I'm going to come back to that exhausting thing just now. And like I said, one of the things we did do is try trivia night. I don't think we actually expected lots of students to engage with it, but we had about 140 students on trivia night. I know Annie was a bit stressed when she saw the teams, 34, 38, 40 teams. She was worried that we were going to have to not allow some teams because we were using the free account, but it was a great evening and the students loved it. It took only 1 hour for us to run it, but I think the impact it's had in terms of that relationship pedagogy was really important. These multiple channels of opening the conversation has made a really big impact with the students. Some of the other things that we've trialed is things like just-in-time support. So the course that I run is a multidisciplinary course. It runs through with all of our different biomedical sciences disciplines as well as some of the clinical disciplines. So it's really complicated. What we want students to do is take the things that we're telling them independently and then put all the content together and make sense of really complicated patient presentations and try to work out why is the patient presenting in this way and why is this drug working in this way and all of those kind of things. So we're asking them to do complex things and we ask them to do all of this in 7 weeks. And we asked them to do all of this in 7 weeks while delivering it remotely. So I knew that it was a challenging time for the students. And so through Slido, we kind of asked them, what do you think you need help in? And they overwhelmingly wanted help in the biomedical science disciplines. And so because of that, we had, with good reason, kept a little bit of time free in the last week of the course. And so we were able to plug in those really relevant things that they wanted support in. And they were phenomenally appreciative of those extra tutorials that we've put in. We also used near peer tutors. So we used the senior students and the senior students were available to tutor the students, and they actually act as tutors in our courses. The students on multiple times have dropped an email to say thank you for those near peer students, because I feel very comfortable asking them a question that I don't feel as comfortable asking in a tutorial session with the academic staff. And it's not because they don't want to ask us. They don't want to ask the question in a big group with the rest of their peers who they don't really know as well as if it was face-to-face. And like I said, we have multiple channels. I've actually asked the student to put for permission to put this up. So this is just an example of a chat in Teams, and it's a conversation, and the student is just having real struggles learning some content. And so we've worked through the content, but rather than giving her the answer, getting her to work on that. And then, of course, she's going to tell me she loves the course, but I think she actually genuinely loves the course. And then other things that we've gotten in terms of feedback with regard to the things that we've put in place is, I don't know, it's the first time I've actually had students write to me and say, I'm really excited about the exam tomorrow. And that for me is great. It means that they are excited to see how much they've learned, and that means that they've actually been engaging with the content. And even after the exams, I've had a number of students email to say, I know I got that incorrect, but I actually want to know why, and I want to understand this other thing that I chose in an answer and why that wasn't correct. So that was really, really positive for me. And the other thing that we've tried while I'm here, I'm going to try and share another screen. And we've done a few things in terms of virtual reality. So I want to show you what we've been using term with our students. Hopefully I'm going to share screens and it works fine. Can you see that screen? Yep. Yep, great. So this is some virtual reality tools that we embedded in our course for our students. This is a skull. And if you have never seen a skull and held a skull, and someone asks you about all of these little holes in the skull and what goes through each, it is a really difficult thing to do. And so to overcome some of these barriers, we use these really lovely virtual reality tools. We've got them from the skull, the brain, and all the different parts of the brain, which I think the students really, really appreciated in terms of learning anatomy. So there's lots and lots of those kind of tools that we've used. Now, some of these tools we've actually had to leverage from our network on social media. And so we've had this really great community that is sharing resources that everyone has developed so that we can have enough to cover the content of anatomy, which I think is phenomenal. The reason why I think it's phenomenal is that for a long time, that kind of sharing hasn't been the norm. Now, whenever you go out of something, you have to make sure you go back in. So let me just check that I can go back into my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my PowerPoint back there. So yeah, so those are some of the things that we've done in this year. And I just want to talk a little bit for a moment about augmented reality, or mixed reality as it is more correct, because there's so many different forms. I know lots of people think of it as a means of teaching content for disciplines like anatomy and maybe even botany or zoology or something like that, that is really, really tactile and has models. But actually, augmented reality is a really, really rich way to deliver content, and to deliver content in a real world setting. So for example, if you were teaching something like botany, you'd be able to show a plant and would go into the plant and look at the cells and look inside the cell and add different things into the cells to see how that will react. And of course, if you're doing something like history or art, you'd be able to take the virtual tours and really see what is happening. Now, the other great thing that I had the opportunity to do in this last few weeks was to host an international symposium that had about 1,000 people from different parts of the world drop in. And one of the things that I think was really great about that, it was a great think tank. It allowed us to think through different challenges in the discipline, for example, assessment and practical sessions. But I think the other thing that really, really impacted me quite a lot was to realize how lucky we are and how lucky our students are. There were so many academics from our near neighboring countries who were talking about internet being impossible, that their students are living in rooms with 6 or 7 people, so it's really hard to engage in online activity. And so this entire thing about us all transitioning to online, I think I have an heightened sense that there is a great deal of inequity that is going on. Now, in these transitions, obviously, I've learned a lot of things. I think one of the main things I learned is that students want to learn from us. I think that is a bit of a awakening call for me. I think we talk a lot about self-directed learning, but the last 6 months have actually shown me that our students really struggle with self-directed learning, and we need to do a little bit more work in this area. It's not just because we haven't taught them well or prepared them well, or schools haven't taught them or prepared them well. I think we've underestimated the amount of social activity that happens in our classrooms. We usually think of universities as having social clubs for social life, but actually lots of that social life happens in our classroom. And besides missing that social, other thing about they've lost organic peer interactions. So the cues and the prompts that you get from other people, when you see they don't understand the content that you don't understand, is just not there. I chatted to one student just before the exam who was in a heightened sense of anxiety. I actually didn't really think she would exam, but she did, which is great. And her biggest issue was that she's finding this so difficult, and she thinks she's the only one who's finding it difficult. And she said, I think I'm just stupid. It's so complicated and I just don't get it. And so as I spoke to her and showed her, actually it is really complicated, even for me to understand it's complicated. I have to sit down and make sure that I am able to explain this to you clearly without any other interruptions, because it's not an easy concept. And then to actually show, well, there's a number of students who are actually having the same kind of issue. So I think that entire idea of what happens in the classroom, that spontaneous conversation, that walking into a classroom and knowing that other students are struggling with certain things, or walking out of the classroom and realizing, oh, none of us understood that. We actually don't have that experience as students anymore. So we need to think about how we actually make sure that we engage them and they're able to do that. Like I said, multiple avenues of communication. I don't know whether we can ever underestimate how important it is to communicate with our students. creating shared experiences. So that whole trivia night, that was a small thing that we did, but the impact has really, really been great with our students in terms of that was a shared event. They still talk about it and they still refer to it, and it's helped them to actually engage with each other better. So, and even the things like icebreakers, which is really simple, but it is about those shared events. So I was really fortunate in the last few weeks to have been invited by Monash University to think through with their center that does cost value research in education around anatomical sciences education. So the reason I put it here is, for me, it was a bit of a, I don't know whether a breakthrough moment, but it was. I really don't think about education in terms of cost value, but when I worked through this paper and discussed with them, it made so much more sense to me why it is so important for us to have this cost value education decisions at the back of our mind as we plan for next year. I think one of the things I've realized over this year is that generally with everyone I talk about, including myself, that burnout is actually quite real this year. We're so tired. We've tried so many things. We've done so many things. We've had this cognitive load as well as this emotional load on our minds. And so I think when we're thinking about design, we have to be really, really pragmatic. I think what I was really took as a learning moment for this is that everything is a cost value decision. And the cost and the value is around what we want for our students. It's maybe may not be monetary, but it is cost value. And we need to think about that. And in this equation, we actually have to put ourselves in it. And we actually also have to be very pragmatic and real about what we can achieve and what the cost is for us. So I found that really an awakening moment for me in terms of thinking about sustainability and what it is that we can do and what is it that we should actually do. So there's two different things. And then, of course, design. Design needs to happen before a course. If anything I've learned over this last course is that when the course starts, it's so busy. We have to do all the designing, the prep, and have everything up and running before the course even starts. And of course, I'm going to come back to this here because I think the role of the educator has changed. I do think we need a conversation around what this role is. And we also need to make clear for our students what this role is. So yeah, I just want to invite some discussion around that. It's really a big thing, I think, to do. So as we reimagine the world ahead, I think it is going to be more and more of trying and working out which way we go rather than knowing that there is a clear way. But I think if my mind works the way, if your mind works the way my mind works, there's this kind of idea that this is the things that I know how to do and I'm going to do it next year. These are the things that I have in the incubator that I'm thinking about. And these are the things that are a dream for the future. And I think we actually have to break those little barriers that we have to the three sets of things. And we need to bring them all to the table. And we need to be thinking about frameworks around these issues for next year and working on a way in which we can have a common, agreed, evidence-based framework to deal with all the kinds of things that we've been talking about for the last 2 years. For example, micro-credentialing, inclusive design, self-directed learning. I think now is the time for us to start shaping the tomorrow, but we actually need to know what our experiences were and are so that we can have that discussion. Now, I know it probably took far too long, Merlin, so I don't know whether we've got enough time for questions, but that's where I'm going to stop.
We have seen some questions in the chat. Thank you, Nalini. And it's been great to see all your very visual slides and your care for the community. The comments I like most were about building community and getting the students to interact with each other. The other thing I liked was your comment about the 91 emails, and there's been 91 comments in chat at least. And the challenge we face, so we don't have much time, but I would just put this question: we're in the age of white noise and the clamoring for attention, and all of us trying to manage the fact we can communicate, but how do we prioritize communications and plan for it? What have you found the best way to not be overwhelmed and not have the students overwhelmed. And then people got their hands up. AD's next.
Yeah, so Merlin, I've been thinking about this because obviously this is a really taxing thing on a person to do. And I think we just have to embrace technology. We have to automate certain things. And unless we automate it, we're not going to be as efficient. So AD, I think you have a question. So I'm happy to take the question.
Thanks, guys. Look, thanks, Nalini. That's a great talk. And as you know, I've been with you on that journey throughout most of the year. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was your slide about design. And I just had a comment that was really interesting, speaking to some students looking back over the year, they found that the level of engagement, like they got really frustrated when students in their group didn't contribute, didn't put their cameras on. And in the end, the problems that they were talking about were the problems that we have face-to-face or online anyway. And I thought that was quite funny that still on top of everything else we have to do, we still have to go to that extra level of how do we engage even the unengageable. But anyway, that wasn't my question. My question was your ideas for next year. And I agree with you about burnout and looking at the hybrid kind of high flex model. And, you know, thinking about breaking things down into essential presentables or deliverables, but then perhaps stackables on top of that, looking towards the different scenarios we might be dealing with. What do you think about that? What's your approach moving forward to try and keep people, pull them back from the edge and keep them motivated?
Yeah, look, AD, I don't have the answers, but I can tell you this. I think we desperately need to come together as a group before the year ends to reflect on all the things that we've tried and where we are. I know there's so many people, I can see the faces, and I know they've done amazing things. In terms of that stackables, I can tell you this, that we have to manage the perceptions of students. And when they see a whole lot of little things, they get overwhelmed. I know we think chunking things up is great, and that's what the literature has been telling us. But from experience with the students, they actually find that entire chunked up thing overwhelming because they suddenly think that's an explosion of information. So I do think we need to have a little bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, thanks, Nalini.
And Timoy Data. Do you have a question?
Am I audible, please?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Good morning, Professor. Yeah. Good morning, Professor. Professor Nalini, it was a great presentation. I'm an associate professor here in Malaysia in anatomy, and I could, resonate with many of the points put forth by you with regard to student engagement. What particularly struck me was relationship pedagogy and conversational pedagogy, because through our experience over the last 8 months, what we found out was the students want to actually learn from us. It's not a self-directed learning. They really like to learn from us, but then the various inequities come into place. My would be are so much engaged in the processes of trying to engage the students and keep them engaged at a certain level of mental well-being. Are we anywhere down the line compromising on the because as we know, face-to-face walking into a class with the cues and standing in front of a blackboard with a chalk or a marker pen and working things out in conversational flow is missing when we are online. So in any manner, are we having to compress, compromise, or give up on certain content in trying to keep up with our engagement levels? Because this is something what we found was the cognitive load has become too much when it has gone online. So this is something I would like to hear from you, madam.
So thank you for that question. I think you do make an important point that cognitive load online is quite different from when we present it in classrooms, and that's something that we need to be aware of. I think one thing that I've been really aware of and why I started the weekly emails was just reinforcing to students what was the most important thing this last week that you need to get your head around. So out of the 20 lectures that you attended and practice and whatever, what is the 5 things that I think that you need to make sure you get this week? And I think that kind of helps. I think, yeah, we're going to have to work this as we go through. No one has the answers.
Now, I think we may have to just give the vote of thanks now, because people in there, the thing that's changed this year is everyone has to flip over exactly on the hour, because we turn into pumpkins as the clock strikes and we all have to go to other meetings. So look, thank you, Nalini. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. There's 40 of us at the moment, which is terrific. It's great having these at lunchtimes. Thanks to Remy and Grace and all the people in PVCE who've kept these alive, and just it's wonderful to see so many people and such engagement on the chat. And Nalini, it's wonderful to see all your work. I know the students appreciate it, and hopefully we are spreading this across the university and building a stronger community and sharing excellent tips on teaching. And I hope you do all have time to plan for next term. My plan for next term is that we'll be back on campus as much as we possibly can be, and Australia will be back in action in its bubble as the vaccine slowly emerges. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Marlon. Thanks, everyone.